afternoon, everyone. So we now have Irene Tubikanec.
Perfect.
And she'll be talking about network inference and a stochastic multi-population neural mass model by approximate Bayesian computation.
Thank you, James, for organizing this very nice workshop and for inviting me to give this talk. So what I present today is a joint work with Susanne Dietersen from the University of Copenhagen and also with Massimiliano Tamburino from the University of Warwick. And a preprint of this work is available on the archive in case you're interested in further details. Good. So what you see here is a multi-channel EEG dataset which has been recorded during an epileptic seizure. So such data is measured by putting electrodes on your scalp, and each electrode measures the activity of one population of neurons in the brain and yields one such signal. And these 4 blue signals here were recorded with these 4 yellow electrodes. So we have 2 on the left brain hemisphere and 2 on the right. Good, and the goal for this talk will be to understand if and how these, in this case, 4 brain regions interact with each other. So in other words, based on observed data of this type, we want to estimate the network structure. So it means the directed connections among these 4 brain regions or neural populations. So how will we do that? In the first part of the talk, we will introduce a stochastic model, in particular a multidimensional stochastic differential equation, which is able to reproduce such multi-channel EEG data. And this SDE will contain these coupling directions that we are interested in as model parameters. So these coupling direction parameters will be either 1, if there is a connection from one neural population to another, or 0 if there is no connection. Then in the third part of the talk, we will use a simulation-based inference algorithm to estimate the 0-1 connectivity parameters. And this algorithm is based on the approximate Bayesian computation method and relies on a large amount of data that we simulate from the model. So in order to obtain useful estimation results, we first have to derive a reliable and efficient numerical simulation method for this SDE. And this numerical method will be based on the splitting approach. We have heard a little bit about this already. And will be done in the second part of the talk. Good, so but now let's come to the first part. We want to derive this multi-population stochastic neural mass model. And we start by thinking about how to model one single neural population. And well, the model that we will use is not new. It has not been invented by me. It dates back to the work of Janssen and Ritt in the 90s. And it has been also analyzed and reformulated by former colleagues of mine from the University of Linz. But how does the SDE look? So to model one neural population in the brain, we need a 6-dimensional SDE. The reason is that each neural population is modeled as a system of 3 interacting groups of subneurons. We have the main cells, and then there are excitatory and inhibitory interneurons, for each of which we need a 2-dimensional system to account for their oscillatory behavior. Then what can be observed or measured with one EEG electrode is only the difference of 2 of the model components, which corresponds to the input received by the main neurons from the excitatory and inhibitory interneurons. Good, then the model is non-linear because it contains the sigmoid function here, which is, however, globally Lipschitz and even bounded. Then we have several parameters in the model, which are all biologically motivated. important is, for example, this capital A parameter here, because it describes the amount of excitation in this neural population. So if we increase this parameter, we have a larger activity in this population. Then the SDE is driven by standard Wiener processes or Brownian motions to account for the stochasticity in the system. Good, so to summarize, we need a 6-dimensional SDE to model one population of neurons whose activity can be measured with one EEG electrode. So how can we now model n possibly interacting neural populations? So we may take the SDE from before and start by saying that the cave population can be described exactly by that system, and we assign an index k to all of the model components, and now the process yk, this difference describes the cave EEG signal. Good. Then we may continue saying it might be plausible to assume that each neural population has its own behavior. So we may assign an index k also to all of the model parameters, allowing all neural populations to behave differently. Good, so what is left to do is to find a way to couple these n neural populations together. And here we follow a strategy proposed by Wendling and co-authors in the year 2000. So in particular, through this red coupling term here, the cave neural population receives input from the main neurons of all other populations, the X1s. And this input is excitatory, which is why we place it on the 5th dimension, which corresponds to the excitatory interneurons. And what is important are these coupling direction parameters rho jk here, because they describe exactly the network among these n populations. So they are either one if there is a connection from the cave neural population to the cave, or 0 if there is no connection. Then these k parameters here are coupling strength parameters, so they can assume any positive real value. And yeah, now we have an n-dimensional observed process with the corresponding differences of all the n neural populations. Good, so to give you an idea about which impact this coupling term has on the model, I'd like to show you one concrete example for n equal to 4 neural populations. So in this example, all the 4 populations show a kind of regular non-active behavior, and also none of them are coupled, so all these rho parameters are set to 0. Now, what we can, for example, do is to activate the first population by increasing this A parameter that I mentioned before. So increasing this A leads to a larger activity in this population, but still all of them are not coupled. And now we want to see what happens if we change this coupling parameters rho, such that the first population influences the second, the third, and the third, the fourth. So through this coupling, we see that also other populations get activated, and we chose a moderate coupling strength. If we increase the strength of the coupling, we see that each population gets activated one after another, and we observe a so-called synchronized brain activity. Good. So now we have introduced the model and analyzed a bit its behavior. So the second part will be to derive a suitable numerical method for this SDE. And in particular, we extend a splitting method, which has been proposed in 2017 for one neural population, and we extend it to the N population case. And the main idea behind this method is to reorganize this big system of SDEs so to rewrite it as a kind of Hamiltonian type system. And for such a system, splitting methods are quite well developed. Or you could also think of it as some Lageveux type equation if you prefer this. Good, so let us recall our STE. So this is how we can model the cave population. And now let's see how we could rewrite this complicated system in a simpler way. So we may start by saying that let us combine these three components of the cave population into a vector that we call QK. We may also combine these three components into a vector PK. Then we observe that exactly this vector also appears here. Then we see that here we have terms where the parameters are marked in blue, which only depend on x1, x2, and x3. So only on the QK component of that population. So we can rewrite these terms like this here. And these model parameters we write into a diagonal matrix gamma k. Similar for these terms, we see they only depend on x4, x5, and x6. So only on the P component of the system. So we can rewrite it like this here. Then we may combine all the nonlinear terms containing the sigmoid function and also this coupling term into a function that I call G. And we see again that it only depends on the Q component. And finally, we combine these three linear processes into a vector WK, and we write the corresponding noise parameters also into a diagonal matrix sigma k. Good, so we found quite a contact formulation for the cave population. However, to derive a numerical method, we need an expression for the whole 6n dimensional STE. But this is now straightforward. We just combine all these n QKs into a large vector Q. So it is now 3n dimensional. We do the same for the P component, for the linear processes and the nonlinear terms. And the matrices gamma and sigma here are now much larger diagonal matrices containing all the corresponding parameter collections of all the n populations. Good. So now we have a very compact formulation for our actually arbitrarily large 6n dimensional STE. So now the question is, what would be a numerical method to simulate from this STE? And well, you may say, why not simply using a standard Euler-Mariana approximation? Because, well, it is convergent because the STE is globally Lipschitz. It has order 1 because we have additive noise. But the problem with the Euler-Mariana method is, so it's well known that it does sometimes not preserve important structural properties of STEs. So among others, it's bad in preserving oscillatory dynamics in the sense that it tends to produce oscillations with way too large amplitudes, or sometimes also with the wrong frequencies. And this is, of course, problematic since brain activity is oscillatory. I mean, this may be corrected by using an extremely small time discretization step delta, but then, of course, the method becomes very inefficient. And we cannot really use it in a big simulation-based inference approach. So instead, we will use a splitting method, which turns out to have the same convergence order, but it is much better in preserving the dynamics of the process. Good, and well, the basic idea behind the splitting method, for those who are not familiar with it, is to take the STE, which we cannot solve, to divide it into subparts that we can solve, then to derive the solutions of the subparts, and in the end to compose them again in order to obtain a numerical method for the original STE. But let us see how this works in more detail. So the reason why this SDE is not solvable is this nonlinear term G here, which contains the sigmoid functions and also the coupling term. The rest just forms a linear SDE with additive noise and with some damped Hamiltonian structure here. So the idea is to divide this SDE into two subsystems, which turn out to be both analytically solvable. So we have a linear SDE with additive noise and this Hamiltonian structure, and a nonlinear ODE, which kind of treats this ugly term. Good, and we will not treat these two equations separately, derive a solution for both of them, and in the end, they have to be combined again. So let us start with the first subsystem. So this one, which can again be rewritten like this, with a matrix A bar that appears in the drift, which has a very sparse structure, which comes from the Hamiltonian structure. Well, we know how to solve a linear additive noise SDE. So the solution, I write it here down on a discretized time regime, where we go from a point at time ti to the next one at time ti plus 1 with a delta step. So the solution contains the matrix exponential of this matrix A bar here, and a normally distributed component with a covariance matrix, where again this matrix exponential and also the noise matrix sigma play a role. Good, so far so good, but to be able to really implement this method, we have to find closed form expressions for these two matrices here. But since we have this nice Hamiltonian structure, or this sparse structure in this matrix A bar here, we are able to obtain quite compact formulations for these two matrices. Good. And regarding the second sub-equation, so you see that the derivative of the first component Q is just 0, so it is constant. And the second component only depends on this constant. So this ODE is also straightforward to solve analytically. Good, and as I mentioned, now to obtain a numerical method for our 6n-dimensional SDE, we would have to combine these two solutions again. And there exists several possibilities. What we use is a standard Strang approach for those who know that. But I don't want to go into detail on this. Instead, I want to come to the third part, where we want to use this splitting method to estimate the parameters of our N population SDE. So on the one hand, we want to estimate the real valued model parameters, and on the other hand, this 0-1 network parameters. And we will do this by adjusting some sequential Monte Carlo approximate Bayesian computation algorithms, so in short, SMC-ABC. Good, so the algorithm that we use is quite long and contains quite heavy notations, I would say. So my idea would be to show you just the basic algorithm, to show you the basic ideas of ABC, because I think we didn't hear much, probably even nothing on that so far in this week. And then later I give you just a very rough idea about the sequential approach and about my contribution in this context. So the basic idea behind ABC is, well, we observe some data, for example, the multi-channel EEG data set that I showed you in the beginning, and we assume a prior distribution for our parameter vector that we call now theta. So it contains real valued model parameters as well as these 0-1 network parameters. And then we repeat many times the following. We draw a value for theta from the prior. We use this value to simulate a synthetic data set or a path from the SDE, or actually from its observed components. Then we compute some summary statistics of this data set and calculate the distance to the summaries of the observed data. And if this distance is smaller than some threshold level delta, then we keep the sampled value for theta as a sample from our ABC posterior. So we kind of collect good values for theta, which then represent our ABC estimate. Good, and while this basic algorithm has a big disadvantage, it is very computationally heavy because we simulate parameter candidates from the prior distribution throughout. So a lot of them are rejected in the end, for which we have spent a lot of computational effort. So the idea of the SMC or sequential approach in general is, well, to also start from a prior distribution. Like here we have a uniform prior for a continuous model parameter over some plausible range. And we also have a discrete uniform prior for the 0-1 connectivity parameters. And then the idea of the sequential approach is, like, based on some suitable proposal samplers or perturbation kernels to construct intermediate distributions through several iterations, which move closer and closer to the desired posterior. And what we did in this context is to adjust such an algorithm to efficiently account for the 0-1 network parameters through some, let's say, Bernoulli type perturbation kernels. Good, so no matter which ABC algorithm we use, whether it's this basic one, some sequential approach, or some adjusted version, the quality of the results will depend a lot on how we choose some basic ingredients. So one important thing is, of course, the numerical method that we use for synthetic data generation. And as I said, for this SDE, the Euler-Maruyama method is not suitable, so we will apply this splitting method. And the quality of this algorithm also depends a lot on how we choose these data summaries. And what we propose to do is, well, if this is our data, so instead of working directly with paths of the SDE, we propose to derive several summary functions based on this data, which contain a lot of information. Like, for example, we have here the marginal densities of these four populations. Then to account for the frequency domain, we also look at the spectral densities. And to understand whether there are connections among the populations, we also have cross-spectral densities and also cross-correlations as functions of the time lag. Good, but now I'd like to show you some estimation results that we obtained for this neural mass model. So we start with one example. So this is the data that we observe. For now, we use simulated observed data to test the method, and we look at n equal to 4 neural populations. And based on observed data of this type, we want to estimate this 4 activation parameters. So these capital A's that I mentioned earlier, we have one coupling strength parameter K, and then we have 12 network parameters. Good. So let us start with the results for the continuous parameters. So we start with uniform prior distributions. We run the ABC algorithm and obtain these blue marginal posterior distributions. And since we use simulated data as observed data, we know the underlying true parameter values. You see them here as dashed black vertical lines. So we obtain unimodal shaped posteriors, which nicely cover the true values. For the network parameters, we also start with uniform priors, the zeros and ones being equally likely. We run the algorithm and obtain these, in this case, extremely clear posteriors, and these are the true values. So we are able to correctly reconstruct the full network in this example. And let me mention that we tested the method on very different types of networks, and we obtained similarly good results. Good, so before I come to an end, I'd just like to mention very briefly that we applied this method also to the real data with epileptic activity that I showed you in the beginning. You see it now here on the right. And we applied it also to the 40 seconds EEG data, which were measured directly before the start of the seizure. And then we compared the results. And what we could see is, so first of all, also for the real data, we obtained very clear shaped posteriors. And for example, we saw a larger activation of each of the individual neural populations during seizure, a larger noise intensity in both the left and the right brain hemisphere during seizure, and also a stronger connectivity in the left brain hemisphere for this particular patient. Good, so with that, I'd like to finish my talk, and thanks a lot for joining.